Yeah, I'm really pleased to be with you tonight to talk about the trade union movement and its relevance for the just transition or the transition movement, and more generally for the climate justice movement. I am soon going to put my presentation on slideshow, but I've got a little survey for you in a moment, so I'll do that in a minute. I have put this quote that I love from Chico Mendes, who was a trade union leader and environmentalist in Brazil in the 70s and 80s, who organized workers in the rubber taping industry, but also fought for the defense of the Amazon, indigenous rights, and Brazilian farmers' rights. He said, environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening. So just a little bit of a provocation to start us with. I'm going to give you a little bit of my background, but while I do that, I would love you to fill this very short survey. If Rona, you are able to share it in the chat. There's only a couple of questions just to get to know you a little bit more, or what's your experience with trade unions. So one question is, are you a member of a trade union? And what has been your engagement with trade unions? So hopefully you can respond to this survey, and we'll quickly look at the results in a moment. But yeah, myself, I've been a trade union representative for over 15 years now. I'm based in Liverpool, and I used to be a trade union rep at the Liverpool Museums. I also serve at different level of the unions. At the time, I was with PCS. Unfortunately, I lost my job a few years back, and now I am a member of Unite the Union, and I co-founded a climate justice group within Unite, the trade union. I've been involved in a number of climate justice campaigns around the anti-fracking, the campaigns for museums to drop all sponsorships, and many others. But always my aim was trying to link up the climate justice activists with the workers and the trade union movement to build alliances. So hopefully you've been able to vote in the survey. I don't know if that was enough time, but I'm just going to look at the result page and see where we are at. Hopefully that's going to work. I think not everybody has voted yet, but let's have a quick look at what we've got. Are you a member of a trade union? Well, we've got 33% of people who voted are. And a number of you, 44%, used to be in a trade union, but are not anymore. So, we've got people who have been part of the trade union movement, and it's quite often that climate activists are actually also members of unions or have been in the past. The second question was how you've engaged. So we can see that 1% have engaged with workers and their unions in your campaigns. 40% have supported campaigns by workers and trade unions, and a third of you have never worked with unions. So we've got a bit of a range of different approaches. So thank you so much for sharing that with me, and I'm now gonna start the presentation properly. So why will it be relevant for the UK transition movement to actually collaborate or work with trade unions? There are several reasons, and I'll just briefly go over some of them. Despite the fact the trade union movement has declined, in the last 40 years, there are still 6 million workers in the UK who are members of trade unions, and they're potentially a key ally because they are present in every region, every town and cities, every communities, and they obviously represent a lot of workers who are in those problematic industries that have got an impact on the climate crisis. So people who work in fossil fuel industries, or also energy intensive industries like glass, paper, factories, produce a lot of CO2s. They are in a key position if we can win those workers as ally of the climate justice movement and to embrace some of our campaigns. They can make a real difference. They are also able to, campaign in their workplace, potentially taking industrial action or strikes for demands that they will support. So a big power in the country. Trade unions, despite what we may think, they've got an interest in the quality of the environment for a long time. And through that, we talk about a closer environment rather than the global environment. Trade unions have been campaigning around the health and safety of workers for over a century. And in the right-hand corner, I've put the example of the match girl strike back in 1888, who were campaigning against the chemicals pollution in their factory environment. They were working with sulfur to produce those matches. The trade unions have also played an important role in defining the meaning of just transitions. They, in particular, managed to get the concept of just transition into the Paris COP21 agreement in 2015, although it was only in the introduction rather than, a proper paragraph. But there was a lot of activities, and trade unions are present every year at the COP climate talks, lobbying for their demands. Trade unions also got a long history of organizing workers and working class communities, and unfortunately, there is still a challenge for the transition and climate justice movement to engage more those working class communities, the more deprived and the poorest areas. So if we can build this alliance with trade unions, we may be able to reach out more to new constituencies of people that could join a mass movement for change around climate justice. Trade unions also have a long history of organizing at international levels. They have rarely focused on their only national interest, and I've seen workers' rights as something where you need to collaborate at an international level. And we do understand that it is a similar approach that we should adopt when it comes to combating the climate crisis and rebalancing the inequalities that arise from it and from the history of empire and colonization. There have also been examples of industrial struggles related to the environment. And the other picture on the left-hand side refers to the Green Bans, which is a movement that happened in Australia between 1971 and 1975, where members of the Builders Union actually refused to work on a number of development projects that were threatening either green spaces or historic housing and historic buildings in Sydney. So some good basis there to actually find a new ally. A more recent example, which I've been deeply involved in, is the anti-fracking movement, over a period of 7-8 years. Obviously, a lot of climate justice groups and a lot of local communities started to organize against the fracking technologies that were threatening their communities and the environments. One of those big struggles was happening in Blackpool, where I really got involved in, but actually there were resistance all over the country. And as we know, it led to a ban of fracking a number of years ago. One of the strategy of the fracking companies was to promise that the fracking industry will bring thousands and thousands of jobs. There were different type of figures. We had about 30,000, 50,000, even 70,000. It was David Cameron at the time that was promising this. And obviously that could be very attractive to trade unions. So there was a very big effort in the trade union movement to organize against those jobs that didn't yet exist and were the jobs of the future. And we managed to bring a lot of workers to take part in the anti-fracking protest, the climate camps that were taking place, supporting the local community, and also work in counterbalancing the claims around jobs, disseking, where are those jobs? Who is it going to go? Is it really going to benefit the local community? And what are the alternative jobs that we should be seeking instead in renewable energy, housing insulation, public transport, etc. So I like to believe that the involvement of the union movement did help the effort to reach the ban for anti-fracking. Just transition, as I mentioned, is very meaningful with workers. And this slide has actually been taken from the Scottish Trade Union Congress. Now the trade union bodies, which is the federation under which most of the unions are gathered and collaborate, they have created a position of just transition officers, and they're really making effort to reach out to workers for them to understand the meaning of that concept, and also maybe avoid some misunderstanding about this just transition. I think it's now being used by a lot of people, including employers, including multinational companies, but it classified the benefit for workers under like those three headings of avoiding harm. And this is about, people not losing their jobs, moving to a new type of industries, and also communities where those workers are based shouldn't be left behind by the change. Workers could actually secure benefits through a just transition. We need to make sure that jobs created in new industries like renewable or housing insulation are actually provided with good job security, conditions, pensions, sick pay, rather than being a precarious sector that workers struggle to live on. Also, the benefit of having a just transition is to make sure that workplaces are more secure. We know the harms that not only CO2 emissions are doing, but also air pollution is often a big issue for workers, whether they work in depots or deliveries, but also people who work in schools and in polluted area. And ultimately, this is about transformation. The trade union movement is very much behind the introduction of public ownership for key sectors where maybe the private sector cannot be relied on to ensure a rapid transition. But there are also challenges. It's not an easy task to engage with trade unions. There's like different reasons for that. The trade union movement can be a very radical space in terms of politics. So you may have, people who are, on like a socialist sort of politics. They may have demands around bringing back certain sector into public ownership that not everybody in the climate movement and the transition movement may agree with. But I think, this is part of building a mass movement, is to also be aware that we can't agree about everything, and having those dialogue about what solutions can be put in place. There are also the involvement of political parties in the trade union movement. A number of unions are affiliated to the Labour Party, and a number of radical left parties operate inside the trade union movement. So you may be confronted with sort of like political colors that you not always agree with. There is an history of tension between unions and the environmental movement. I think there are some misperception on both sides. It may be that unions and workers sometimes see the climate movement as a bit too middle class, not respecting their difficult working conditions. And on the other side, the environmental movement can see the unions sometimes as quite conservative when it comes to the rapid change we need to face the climate crisis. And I think one of those challenges is the issue of jobs, where for too long, action on climate was seen as, well, we're going to have to get rid of those industries and therefore all those jobs. But that's not unsurmountable, because, as I say, we know we can also create a lot of jobs in shifting our production system to a more sustainable system. And one of the most challenging piece of work that I have come across all those 15 years I've been trying to engage workers in the climate movement has been to work with workers in CO2 intensive industries, oil and gas workers in particular, but also workers in the aerospace, the automotive sectors. And it's not unusual that even when there is a progressive approach in the sector, that quite often the solutions that are proposed come from the employer, and that can be seen as a bit of greenwashing. So, for example, the idea of carbon capture and storage has still got lots of resonance in the trade union movement, or hydrogen, not necessarily knowing the difference between blue and green hydrogen. So I think that although there are challenges, I think that both movements can really much learn of each other. So in the second part of my presentation, I'm just going to give you a few tips and see a few ideas about how your local transition groups may develop relationship with workers and then unions locally. The first advice I will give you is to actually do a bit of mapping of your local areas. So who are the workers and trade unions in your area? What are maybe the big employers in your area that employ a lot of people, or there may be some problematic industries that you're able to identify. And you can do a little bit of research to see who are the unions who represent those workers. And this, you may be able to find information either on social media or in the press, especially when there are industrial struggles. There is also at the bottom, I've put a website from the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, that lists all the unions that exist in the UK, telling you which sectors they operate on. But in some sector, you may have more than one trade union as well. So that's not unusual in local councils, or in the health sector, you may have 2 or 3 different unions in the same workplace. One good one to look out for is what we call a trade union council. Sometimes they're called trades councils as well. There are unions in the community, and often trades councils, they represent lots of different trade unions in the area, and they come together on community campaign, whether they are about, protecting the NHS or solidarity with migrants. Trades council engage in far more sort of like community campaign, and there may be a good point of contact to start with. Okay, I'm just repeating a few things there. Ask yourself, what is the key union campaign you've recently heard of? I mean, in Liverpool, we had for 2 months, the museum workers were actually on strike. So that, was all over the press. People knew about it. The museum was closed. People were really upset about it. So there are often quite visible elements to those struggles. There is also a really good tool called Strike Map. You can go on the website and you can actually search for any strike happening in your area, and that will give you a good idea of trade union activities there. One of the easiest way to create a relationship with unions and workers is actually to support their strike and trade union campaigns. Recently, we had the big strike waves in the face of the cost of living crisis, with workers asking for pay rises, but there may be campaigns to defend jobs or against privatization of public services, and actually going and support their picket lines can be a good way to establish strategic relationships, meet individuals face to face, and have that dialogue. So that I will share a resource documents after the session, and I run a number of training for people who may not be confident to go to a picket line, to explain how you can approach it. But it's about having the conversation and identifying those allies. Many trade unions also have what we call green reps. They are environmental representatives in the workplace. They may be doing environmental assessments of the workplace and buildings. They may be negotiating with the workplace management about measures to reduce CO2 emissions. They may also be involved into local campaign and seeking to get their union branch involved. And that's a good way, building this relationship, to get support for your local campaigns, because a lot of those trade union branches, they are interested in what's happening outside the workplace. And they usually have got regular branch meetings in which trade union motions can be submitted. A trade union motion is simply a sort of like mini manifesto that explains an issue that you may be campaigning on, and encourage the branch to get involved with some action points. In the resource document, you will have a little guide on how to write a motion and what is the process to pass it. It will be easier if you are already a member of a union. Try to find out, is your branch meeting? Have you got a branch secretary or branch chair that you could approach? Have you got a green rep in your workplace that you could talk to about those issues? I'm conscious that I'm coming soon to the end of my time because I can't see the time, unfortunately. But this is just a couple of photographs of some of the activities that I've been involved in with the Liverpool Climate Justice Coalition. We have been supporting a number of strikes, whether they were dockers or transport workers and museum workers. We've been having this conversation on the picket line, and transport strikes in particular have been really fruitful when it came to discussing the climate crisis, because obviously public transport workers have got high stake in maintaining good public transport service. And this type of initiative have been taking place in lots of different parts of the country. Finally, I think it's really important that when we think about linking with workers and a union is to think beyond the energy intensive industries, because they are the most difficult to actually build relationship with and make a real difference. There are workers everywhere in our transport system. We've got local government workers. Many of them have already been involved in pension divestment campaigns, for example. Health workers are very much aware of what is at stake with the climate crisis, the impact of air pollution and extreme weather events, heat waves on people. Teachers are very concerned. There was a lot of discussion in some of the groups I am in about, pupils having to wear certain uniforms, some pupils fainting, and teacher can be a good constituency. But it's also true for postal workers. Your local postie who is walking around for all his shift when it's 30 degrees outside will be concerned about the climate crisis. Warehouse workers in Amazon that I've been working with, very aware of, for example, the plastic waste generated in their workplace. Similarly, with food and hospitality workers, concerned about food waste and heat at work. And a number of unions have been involved in campaigns around fuel poverty, energy for all, and air pollution. Just to conclude, I'll just give you two quick examples of campaigns that are currently ongoing and where we have seen alliances between the climate justice movement and workers. You may be aware that in Port Talbot in Wales, Tata Steel have decided to transition their coal blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces. A good thing for the climate. They are getting incentive and subsidies for the government to do so, but they have announced that 3,000 workers will lose their jobs in the process. Not only workers will be affected, but their actual entire local community is really going to be affected if this number of people lose their jobs. So recently, climate groups have been coming to support the protest at the factory. They've been creating open letters to election candidates. They've been leafleting the local community and talking about why it's so important that, yes, we change the technology that creates steel, but also why we need steel as an essential element of the transition if we want to build more wind turbine and other technologies necessary for the transition. The second example I'll give before I finished is a new initiative called Heat Strike. This is about mobilizing communities, climate groups, and workers around the issue of heat waves that are becoming more and more prevalent because of the climate crisis. And we're seeing heat wave now almost every summer. This is actually a huge issue for workers, whatever the sector is. I've already mentioned postal delivery workers or food and hospitality workers and warehouse workers. But actually, we had an online rally early in June, and you will get the link if you want to hear a little bit more. But we had contribution from Italian workers who have been campaigning for a heatwave furlough if it's too hot to work. There is no maximum workplace temperature currently in the workplace, and this is already starting to have a massive impact on the health of workers. They are really concerned about it. They are really on board about it. And we're going to try to mobilize people over the summer to have either actions in their communities or their workplaces.